Today we're going to talk about turmoil. If you haven't been paying attention, you may not have noticed that there are a number of things going on in the world. It is to the point, I say this every week, I know, and I sound like I'm repeating myself, and I am repeating myself, because it seems like every week it's, of all the things that I think would be related to Bible prophecy, it's really, really hard to keep up. And it's hard to distill all of that into into the 45 minutes that I speak each week before I get to my main point. The convergence of events, the acceleration, all of these things that are going on. And these old covers I've been using for a while now from Foreign Policy magazine, Can We Fix This in a World Disrupted? Certainly seem to be true as we head towards this period of time that we know as the 70th week of Daniel, and when that will come about. I often cite 2 Timothy chapter 3, and I think it's appropriate this week again, but I'm going to read somewhat of a different part of it as a lead into some of the things I want to talk about at the beginning. And then we'll just sort of look at the things that are going on in the world. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. And then Paul goes on and he describes the characteristics of these people in the last days: boasters, proud, self-absorbed, etc., etc. And then in verse 8 he turns to an Old Testament story. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also resist the truth. By the way, the fact that Paul referred to the Old Testament would seem to indicate that pastors who run around saying that we don't really need to pay attention to the Old Testament they're denying Paul. I mean, there's no other way to describe this. So do these also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds reprobate concerning the faith. But they shall proceed no further, for their folly shall be manifest unto all men, as theirs also was. Verse 12, yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. But evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. But continue thou in the things that thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them, and that from a child thou hast known the holy scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. All scripture is given by inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. And when Paul wrote this, not much of the New Testament was being circulated. So when he's referencing the Holy Scriptures here, he's referencing what we call the Old Testament. And again, it's a refutation of the people who want to run. I don't care what camp they come from. I don't care if they come from an Andy Stanley camp. I don't care if they come from a hyper-dispensational camp that want to divorce themselves from all of Scripture. I just think it's an error. My opinion is irrelevant. And we need to be on guard against those who would do that. And then this verse we also talk about often: woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Next month in Toronto will be this conference, Revival 25 Conference. Did I look like I was hanging on or something? Revival 25 Conference. what do you think? What happened 25 years ago in Toronto? I can't believe it's been that long. The Laughing Revival. So you can go to it. You can the premium and experience is we need to up our prices around here maybe from zero. $300 for the premium experience includes reserved seating and parking, express check-in, private lounge, and a swag bag. And here are some of the, in terms of if you wanted to find false teachers, you would refer to the speaker page, I believe, as a target-rich environment. You see here, John and Carol are not, and I've talked about them in that video I did, Stream of Ecumenism, that went with Kenneth Copeland, Tony Palmer, James and Betty Robeson to meet with the Pope and talk about how we're all really one. We need to put aside these divisions and adopt Tony Palmer's statement that he made at Kenneth Copeland's conference that Luther's protest is over. Didn't say why. Sean Boltz, Heidi Baker, Bill Johnson, Randy Clark, all of these people associated with the what was then the Toronto Airport Vineyard. And initially adopted by the Vineyard, this was followed by John Wimber and the Vineyard movement. But when they started getting down and barking like dogs and making animal sounds in church services, Wimber had to disfellowship this group of people. But now they're celebrating their 25th. And I have a feeling that you're not going to hear many people talk about what happened 25 years ago. It's sort of like the emerging church. It didn't go away. It's still around, and it's being incorporated in what I would call mainstream evangelicalism. And that's why you need to guard against it. Now, a lot can be said about this particular incident. Wheaton College, Ryan Baumberger spoke. He had a talk, was sponsored by the Wheaton College Republicans, and that's encouraging that there are Republicans at Wheaton College still. He spoke, and the title of his talk was Black Lives Matter in and Out of the Womb. Ryan and his wife have a ministry that's pro-life oriented. He is biracial himself, and he came and he spoke about the racist aspects of abortion and the abortion movement. I'll play a little bit of a clip, and then we'll go through how the student government reacted to what he had to say. So here's a clip of Ryan speaking at Wheaton on November 14th.
Her whole worldview was that the way that you address issues of poverty was to eliminate those who are impoverished, not to eliminate the problem that causes the poverty. I just want to play you a clip. This is actually an interview with Margaret Sanger, and she's asked if she believes in sin. And so this is her response. Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes is the one who's asking the question. Just listen to her response.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean to believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin.
The American Eugenics Movement, which Alan Guttmacher, who's the reason for the name of the organization, he was the vice president of the American Eugenics Movement. There's so much to get into here, but I think if I read just this quote, this is actually from the American Eugenics Manifesto, 1935. This is what they had such a low regard for humanity. In this, they say, why is eugenics sometimes called race hygiene? because it will do for the race what personal hygiene does for the individual. The defective, whom we have just been considering, may be compared to an insidious disease affecting the body politic. Eugenics is racial preventive medicine. The president of the American Eugenics Movement, Frederick Osborne, one of the founders of it, he had to say this after Roe v. Wade, years after Roe v. Wade was unconstitutionally decided upon. He said, birth control and abortion are shaping up to be the greatest eugenic advances of our time. You can't understand these statistics today unless you have context. And then one more, you probably have heard of RBG, the notorious RBG. Anybody in here? Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Unfortunately, she's not notorious for this particular quote, and she should be. In 2009, New York Times Magazine asked her about Roe v. Wade and why it was passed. She was asked about the ruling, and this was her response. She said, frankly, I had thought at the time that Roe was decided there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. And Planned Parenthood responded. I mean, $1 billion organization was threatened by a small little nonprofit, and they came up with this. Like I said, it's a crockumentary.
Okay, so he's referencing himself and his wife setting up this little pro-life organization, and Planned Parenthood then came out with a 20-minute, he called it a crockumentary, and this is just a little bit from that.
20 minutes featuring African Americans extolling the greatness of Planned Parenthood. I'm just going to play you a small clip so you can understand why is $1 billion abortion federation so threatened by the truth of a husband and wife team, calling them out on their history. See, Planned Parenthood was birthed in eugenic racism, but they never severed that timeline. They never severed that connection. How do you sever from your past if every year you give out the Margaret Sanger Award?
And he's right. Well, now, this was a Christian college, the evangelical Harvard. It's often, that's what they refer to themselves as. And so that led to a lot of turmoil on campus. The Wheaton Record came out with an article saying, oh, well, this guy's been very controversial in past conferences. He's made these racist statements. He's making, do you understand how upside down the world is? And that he was criticized on a Christian college campus for saying this? And so the student body president and 4 others, by the way, only one of which actually attended his talk, but it's on YouTube. You can find it. The Daily Wire did a very good article on it, and there's a link to the whole YouTube video. It's about an hour-and-a-half talk, includes the Q&A session, and people at Wheaton were triggered by this because he was challenging assumptions. He referenced Martin Luther King, and he says, look, for all we like about what Martin Luther King did, he wasn't omniscient, and he didn't do his homework on the origins of Planned Parenthood, which I listened to his talk, and I have to tell you, I think I agreed with everything he said, except there was one point where I thought he was a little bit too generous in the way he went after Planned Parenthood. But by and large, he was accurate. He had quotes, he had documentation to show that there was this desire to get rid of undesired classes of people, including a sitting Supreme Court justice. And believe me, the social justice warriors will go into complete, total meltdown if she passes away and Donald Trump gets to replace her, appoint her successor, or who will take her seat on the Supreme Court. And they're going to pull out all the cryogenics stops that they can to keep her on the bench until somebody comes in that will replace her with the right person. So the email starts out, it says, as many of you know, a special interest club hosted an event on Wednesday night titled Black Lives Matter In and Outside the Womb. The speaker of this event, Ryan Baumberger, made several comments at the event that deeply troubled members of the community. His comments, this is a quote, surrounding the topic of race made many students, staff, and faculty of color feel unheard and unsafe on our campus. The administration at Wheaton and the Board of Trustees have essentially, well, I don't know what the equivalent would be of taking the fifth. They're silent about it. I've mentioned this. So this is the state I'm afraid of a lot of evangelical. The left is winning, my friends. Dennis Prager and others say that leftism is the most powerful religion of the last century. He's right. Because you might have Jewish people, but if they're leftist, they're leftist. You might have people who claim to be Christians, but if they're leftist, they're leftist. And I didn't have time to edit it down. There was a revival in Lynchburg, Virginia. I was able to pull down some of the video from that of the Red Letter Christians, Shane Claiborne, Tony Campolo, and it was an evening of social justice warriors, Mother Earth, and whatever else you want to talk about. I just felt that with the other things I'm talking about today, that your tolerance level for what I have to say would be not listened to. I mentioned this, and again, I don't have time to go into this in detail. Each year, The Economist magazine puts out an issue that is sort of predictive, what they think in their analysis is going to happen in the upcoming year. Now, I think there's one of two ways about looking at this. One way is they're actually trying to send a message, or two, they're being very clever at marketing. I personally think it's a combination of the two because they get everybody talking about it. I'm talking about it because every year they come out with these covers and they have just very interesting messages, I think, behind some of the imagery on the covers. Now, this was 2016, and I've mentioned this before. This was 2017 when they did sort of tarot type cards predicting things, Planet Trump, and they had all kinds of things. You know, they had you see down here in the Hermit, you see the people marching, Wheel of Fortune, Brexit, and that type of thing, the Magician. I mean, it's very interesting symbology, and a lot of it has roots, frankly, in occult symbols. And so then the next year, it was just icons. Now, when they released the 2019 cover initially, it looked like, and you see, you have a pretty busy cover, a little less information, and then what they at least said in 2019, and maybe this was a marketing ploy, was the cover was black. And a lot of us thought, well, the Economist thinks that things aren't going to go well in 2019. Well, they released another cover that is, if I'm voting for this cover, because it sends a very simple message, this one's a little bit more complex. I don't have time to go into it, but I want you to look at some of the things on this cover. For example, do you see right here, you see the panda bear sitting on the North Pole on top of the world? That's China. The other thing that's interesting is all of the writing is backwards. Do you see this? And that is an occult communication because you have to hold it up into a mirror because you're getting a message from the other side. And so when you look at it like Putin's, and I can't remember what the word is there, up here in the upper right-hand corner, I knew I would do this as soon as Brian moved it up, facial recognition. And the interesting thing is, if you look at that face and the data points that are coming on that, you go across a mountain, a volcano, which may be a signal that it's ready to erupt. And if you keep going to the left on the cover, you have Donald Trump facial recognition. Some people think that you're finally going to be able to get the real Donald Trump revealed. Then you have Britain, the Brexit thing here, Britain beyond Brexit, the bulldog. Then go to the right, just to the right of the panda. Do you see, what is that? It's the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And the one on the white horse on the right is got a long beard and very aged. And it's interesting, I don't want to make anything of this. The Rothschild family is behind this magazine. The four horsemen are sitting where? On England. I don't know what it means. Then if you go down here, and then you have the stork here in the middle with the barcode. Designer babies. Now look, this was done up before this thing about the China guy editing DNA came out. And you have Gandhi down there, you have cars, and then you have this big Da Vinci thing. I'm going to move over to the next slide here. You see this is sort of the 500th anniversary of Da Vinci. He's got a Pound Me Too thing on it, which is not backwards, by the way. That's interesting. And so we can sit here and we can decode it. There's the scales there. The other interesting thing here in the person's right hand on the left side of the screen there, over the United States, what is he holding in his hand? Marijuana. And look, I can tell you in the legal industry, there is a tremendous push among law firms to market, to be in on the marijuana business and trade that's coming. And I just don't see that it's not going to be stopped at this point. And I don't think it's a good thing. And then, of course, you have the baseball there, which could be how it used to be in times past, the American pastime, but now it's marijuana. So and then, of course, you have up here on the right of the screen, you have the QR code on the phone there. And by the way, the QR code actually works, and I checked it out. It takes you to economist.com/Leonardo, and it has an article about Leonardo. So you can actually, if you want to go, hold this up to the screen and do the QR code thing, and you'll find out that it's going. Because look, it's clearly that what they think is happening is it's going to be turmoil. And I don't know who this guy is above the QR code. I don't know if that's, some people think it's Karl Marx or someone else. I don't know. But a lot of people, I'm sure you'll see all kinds of YouTube videos from rational people to conspiracy theorists looking at this. And then a bunch of people are going to run out and spend money on this magazine. And my understanding is, like the 2017 cover, costs about $12 to buy the issue, and you can sell, if you have that issue in good condition, you can sell it for $50 or more on eBay. So it's a good investment. And The Economist sells a lot of magazines. I do subscribe to it. I want to see what they're doing. But we live in a time of turmoil. Britain is in meltdown. Here's a cover of the New European, just yesterday, about the British government blowing up over Brexit. What's going to happen? Who's going to survive? Who's going to come out as the new leader? Theresa May's, a lot of people thought she was done a year ago. She's still around, but a lot of people are concerned. And this is look, Great Britain, the UK is a major world power. Military might, economic. City of London is one of the major economic hubs of the world. And what's going to happen? What happens if Jeremy Corbyn of Labour becomes prime minister. And I can tell you from talking to a lot of people when we were in England just a couple weeks ago, people are really worried that that is a possibility. In fact, they're sort of like, don't even mention it out loud, because we don't want it to even, we don't even want to think about what's going to happen. In France, Emmanuel Macron, this is the Economist cover from a couple years ago when he first got elected. And if you can, look up and there was a lot of, I think, intentional occult symbols used when he came out for the announcement that he had won the election. The pyramid at the Louvre, the all-seeing eye above it, the way he raised his hands, and it was all staged. And then the Economist comes out with this cover, and what do you have? You have Macron walking on water. Now, I saw somebody, they said this about, Donald Trump gets very bad press coverage. And so they put Donald Trump in the same place and showing Donald Trump walking on water with the men below it, mainstream media reports, Trump can't swim. You get it? He walks on water because he can't swim. It was a joke. We need to get our sense of humor back. I posted something on my Facebook page the other night, which I thought was very clever. I was reading all these articles about, people opposing the New World Order. You have nationalist movements rising in a lot of European countries. You have it, I think it's coming in Great Britain, in the UK. I think it's coming it's here in the United States, Brazil, the Eastern European countries, and now in France we see all of the riots going on. And I said, the world should unite against globalism. Now, that's a bit of an oxymoronic statement when you think about it. And it was interesting. You can look at my timeline on Facebook, and it elicited a lot of different responses. Now, when Macron came in, they were talking about Europe's new order. They showed Merkel in the shadows and Macron taking center stage. And what's happened? Well, Macron is at center stage, not in a good way today, as we'll see in just a moment, but Merkel is out. They elected a new leader for her party. She's taller, but she's a replacement for Angela Merkel. This is the new Economist, Macron's nightmare. Remember, and the Economist is very good at this, at using symbols to kind of bring in a lot of things. What was it that Macron said about himself? He wanted to reign as a god like Jupiter in his presidency. And so they take the Jupiter statue and they put a big hole in it, Macron's nightmare. And so there's a lot of very interesting symbology. Even this magazine, Liberation, which is a left-wing newspaper, look at the eye that they have there for Macron and the yellow. He's in a lot of problems. These protests have been going on for weeks. This week said that Macron, they put up this image of Macron, how Macron lost his grip. And there is a lot of unrest in Paris. Riots in the street, things are being burned. These protests, this is the fourth week of these protests. They've spread to other cities across France. Macron's approval rating is in the 29% or lower range right now, way below, how bad they say Donald Trump is, but he's really in the dumper. So these protests have continued, they're spreading. They essentially shut down Paris. Here's some more pictures of some things. This is from yesterday's protest. The burning vehicles, these are along the Champs-Élysées in Paris, near the Arc de Triomphe, or however you want to say it. Don't hold me to French pronunciations, please. I had a very wonderful French teacher when I took it in high school, but she was Jewish from Brooklyn. So pronunciations were a little bit off. So that's my defense, and I'm sticking to it. And this was a picture somebody took from a rooftop of what's going on. They have snipers out in Paris. You can see the Arc de Triomphe there. And so they've mobilized forces, water cannons, tanks, that type of thing. Somebody suggested that maybe this meme might actually mean something, that maybe there was a phone call from Netanyahu to Macron saying, I remember you said something about disproportionate and excessive use of force. Melanie Phillips has a great article about convulsions over Brexit and the struggle for the Western nation. She supports nationalism. She thinks that the elites and media that downgrade it are simply ignoring history. They're lying. They've got everything turned upside down, and I agree with what she said, and I would recommend that you go and find that article from December 7th, Convulsions Over Brexit and the Struggle for the Western Nation. Now let's look at the Middle East. Netanyahu went to Brussels, and one of the things he did was he met with Secretary of State Pompeo. They lit a Hanukkah menorah. They said that they came out with a joint statement that we're committed to each other's defense. That was on Monday. By Tuesday, there was an issue going on with regard to Hezbollah tunnels on the northern border of Israel. One of the ex-defense ministers said we've lied about the tunnels along the Lebanon border for years. Ynet had a good article. Tunnels are only a precursor to the real threat. Times of Israel Army claims Hezbollah aimed to use tunnels to cut off Metula, launch a war. And Netanyahu, Hezbollah tunnels are part of the plan to capture parts of Galilee. Now, so along the northern border, they uncovered these attack tunnels. They found 2 so far. They estimate that there are maybe as many as 10. This is a little bit different than the terrain, to give you some idea of where they are. If you've been to Israel, in the upper right-hand corner by Banias, that's where Caesarea Philippi is. Then Tel Dan is, a mile or so away, and then a couple miles away is Metula. So it's all there along the Lebanon border. It's really before the 67 war. It's where the Tel Dan, the northern part of the Tel Dan, north is to the upper part of the picture. The northern part of the Tel was the Syrian border. So if you go to Tel Dan today, you will see foxholes dug by the soldiers in the 67 war. They're still there 51 years later. Metula is a little bit to the east, and there's like a little section. The town down here in the lower left-hand corner is Kiryat Shimona. It's a fairly large town, and they have a water park and that type of thing there. It's a big intersection of highways. But to the north is Metula, and Metula is kind of surrounded on 3 sides by Lebanon. And so the goal was they would dig these tunnels in Metula, and they would then be able to cut that part off, and then they would, with other things going on in an attack, missiles and that type of thing, they would be able to use that as a base to capture the Galilee. Now, I asked somebody questions about this a while ago, and I can't remember who I talked to in Israel, about, we have the tunnels that Hamas builds from Gaza into southern Israel. Are they building tunnels in Lebanon? And the answer that I got was, we don't think so, because it's very rocky soil. It's sandy soil down at Gaza, so it's easy to go in and dig a tunnel and put up your supports. But to dig a tunnel in this area, you have to essentially quarry the limestone to build your tunnel. So it's much more difficult, much more costly, and it's hard to get a lot of them done. So the statement to me was, we don't really worry about it that much, but now we see that there are these tunnels. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments at a press conference that he had about the tunnels. You're not getting any sound? Well, here's what he said. They're building tunnels on our northern border, and we're going to go in and stop it. We're not going to allow it to happen. So here we have these tunnels in Metula. Here's a little video that one of the stations did about showing sort of the terrain of the land, and you can see the border there. And Metula is in that sort of upper circle area, and they dug one tunnel. This is the first tunnel that they found, and it was under a house, and they dug it in. It went at least, I think it was 100 meters into Israel. Don't quote, 40 meters into Israel. So they've come in, and now everybody's, all the UN people, Iran, oh, don't you dare go into Lebanon to destroy that tunnel. And so, there's a chance that they might want to, they're trying to provoke things. So here's a little different illustration about the way the tunnel went. Israel sent its soldiers up there. They sent heavy equipment in. And as you can see in this short video, that they, it's not like you just go in and you dump some water or stuff in there. You have to essentially drill to get into the tunnel because it's very rocky soil. It's mountainous, rocky soil. So they had to bring in essentially mining equipment to take care of the one tunnel that they found, and they discovered another one since. Well, Hezbollah, Iran, everybody got all upset about this. And this is the border wall. So they're right along the border. That's to the left, that green grass down there, that's Lebanon. And there was been wars up there, I think 82, 2006. So Hezbollah said, well, listen, you come up here and do this. This is what we're going to do to you. And they released this video. And this is actual video. It was, I think, taken down off some of the websites. But they said, you come up here, we're going after your cities. And they actually put up video where you can see that they're actually putting crosshairs and targets on Israeli cities. It's an airfield. I think the first one was Netanya. I think this might be the one in the air base in the Megiddo Valley. Jezreel Valley, I'm sorry. And they're saying that we're targeting them because there's a lot of concern on Israel's part that Iran has developed guided missile technology. They had a pretty successful missile test that showed that they could reach Europe with guided missiles. And they're giving that technology to Hezbollah, putting it on existing rockets, which will be a game changer in the event that there's another war. And they have 100 to 150,000. Now, there's some estimates that maybe only a couple dozen of those actually have good guidance systems on them. But if they're launching 100,000 rockets, what are you going to do as the prime minister or defense minister of Israel? And for now, they're combined into two. You're not going to allow that to happen. I played a clip about a year and a half ago from a security conference, the head of the Israeli Air Force, and he said, listen, we're ready if they do something in Lebanon. And what took us 6 weeks to do in 2006, we will do in less than 48 hours this time. So Israel's ready, and I'm confident that they will do this. But look, this is all, I think, related to prophecy, the wars that are going to come on the northern mountain of Israel. Israel fired some warning shots across the northern border, found a new tunnel. Great article at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Hezbollah's operational plan to invade Galilee through underground tunnels. They talk about the man in the middle who was killed in a car bomb. You see Nasrallah on the right. See this gentleman named Mughniyah, Mughniyyah, And then you see the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And this is an older photograph. And it starts off, one of the main lessons Hezbollah learned from the Second Lebanon War in 2006 was the necessity of changing the aims of its next war with Israel. The new goals included building up its defensive capabilities and developing methods of attack that would allow Hezbollah to fight the war within Israeli territory. Hezbollah's military commander, Ahmad Mughenia, led this process of integrating these lessons. He asserted that during the next war, Hezbollah would invade the northern Israeli Galilee region and conquer it. Hezbollah set its sights on regions which have topographical superiority in comparison to Israel's inferior topographical positions near the border. And so what Israel's done is they've built the wall, and they've actually gone in and they've actually created like cliffs along the Lebanon border so that it's difficult for the tanks to come across the border, even if they could breach the wall that was there. But the high ground, I mean, if you drive along there, and we've driven along that border all the way from the Golan all the way over to Nahariya on the Mediterranean, it's very mountainous. It's like the foothills of California, a lot of up and down, but it's much higher than the Galilee region that lies below it. And in any war, you want to control the high ground. That's why the Golan Heights it's called Heights because it's high. And it is, if you've ever seen it, because of the valleys that lead up to it, holding that land, it's one of the most strategic defensive pieces of real estate on planet Earth, if not the most strategic defensive land on planet Earth. So one of the other things that they have done, so the operational plan includes this: the training of Hezbollah special forces to take control of isolated Israeli communities along the northern border. In Hezbollah terminology, this is referred to as the conquest of Galilee. The construction of tunnels infiltrating into Israeli territory close to Israeli communities. The tunnels are intended for the movement of several hundred fighters and not to abduct soldiers or civilians. The model that Ahmad, we'll call him by his first name since I can pronounce that one, the model that he visualized was that of invasion tunnels from North Korea into South Korea, which his Iranian guides had studied intensely. And again, this is proof that there's this cooperation. This is a North Korean tunnel into South Korea. And the technology to build these tunnels in rocky soil, like they have in North Korea, has made its way to Iran, into Hezbollah, into Lebanon. Now, at the same time that all of this is going on, there is a bit of a, even though Israel does not have a constitution, Caroline Glick has a good article talking about the fact that the deep state in Israel, even though they don't have a formal constitution, is causing a constitutional crisis. And that's because of the attacks on Prime Minister Netanyahu with these allegations that he's involved in corruption and bribery. And I've examined some of the, Caroline Glick has a number of really great articles on this I would recommend that you look at. It's very similar to what's going on with President Trump. I'm constantly struck at the parallels between the attacks on Prime Minister Netanyahu and the attacks on President Trump. And we saw some more attacks on President Trump this week. There are a couple narratives out there about what's going on with President Trump. One narrative is Trump's got everything under control. This is all a bunch of fluff. You're going to see tens of thousands of people arrested. They said that in November of 2017. They've been saying it every few weeks since. They were supposed to do it on December 5th, but that was Bush's day of mourning. So now the arrest of these 63,000 people is going to take place December 13th or 14th or later. It's always moved off. I've examined the data on these 63,000 sealed indictments. I'm sort of tired of talking about it. There are not 63,000 sealed indictments. If you think the Justice Department that's allowing Robert Mueller to run rampant is indicted 63,000 people, then we have some serious things to talk about getting you back to reality. Mueller is going, so that's one narrative, is everything is okay. And fine, if you want to believe that, go ahead. I hope you're right. Okay, if you're right, I'll be the first one to say, go President Trump, arrest all these people. But I live in a real world, and I'm willing to admit I'm wrong. Okay, I really am. But the other narrative is Trump and Netanyahu have big trouble. And this is a way people lose elections, and now what are they doing? They're using the judicial system to attack President Trump. They're using the judicial legal system to attack Prime Minister Netanyahu. Caroline Glick was interviewed. I'll just play a very short clip of this on Christian Broadcasting Network the other day about her views about what's going on. And it built on her article on Friday's Jerusalem Post called Israel's Gatekeepers versus Democracy.
We have some serious problems with what we call our deep state in Israel, where you have unaccountable clerks and public servants who stay on forever, and they have a very clear political agenda, which is not the agenda of the elected government or of the people who elected them.
Since the late 1990s, when Netanyahu first served as prime minister, he and his wife Sarah have faced 22 separate investigations.
The left, on the other hand, has completely discredited itself from so many different perspectives that it really has no chance of winning an election in the foreseeable future. They can't deal with the competence that he's bringing to bear in the prime minister's office that's making people like him or vote for him, even if they don't like him. And this is despite the fact that the media treatment of Netanyahu has been overwhelmingly and consistently negative for the past generation.
Middle East expert Carolyn Glick believes the police, the judiciary, and the media are determined to undermine Netanyahu. Glick sees a mirror image between what's happening here with Netanyahu and in the U.S. with President Trump.
They can't find an underlying crime, and so they're trying to go on process crimes. In Israel's case, in Netanyahu's case, they're saying that Netanyahu was bad because he made a deal which was legal, that the regulators approved, and they're trying to do this in order to unseat a sitting prime minister.
Despite the legal cloud, Glick sees hope for Israel's prime minister.
I don't think this is going to work in Israel's case because, again, the public supports Netanyahu, not because we love him, but because he's an excellent prime minister.
Well, I agree with her. And look, the same thing's going on with President Trump. And these are process crimes. But, you know, look, I was troubled when I read the report, the pre-sentence report, or the sentencing memorandum that was publicly filed with the court with regard to Michael Flynn the other day, indicating about who they are targeting. This is troubling. So we have this thing going on the border. Lebanon's involved. You know, they're saying it's no big deal. They don't want any escalation. And Lebanon is teetering because Hezbollah and Iran has a tremendous amount of influence, if not control, over the government. So we don't know what to do. This is a picture that Brian Schrager took. And I think it's interesting in light of what's going on. He was on his walk. He walks in the Judean Hills most days. And he came across this sign. Now, what do you see in the upper left-hand corner of the sign? UNESCO logo. And below here in English it says, Palestine, land of olives and vines, cultural landscape of southern Jerusalem, Batir. But this is UNESCO, the UN, coming in and identifying this as Palestinian land. This is Judea. It's called the Judean Hills for a reason, because they are in Judea. This week, yet again, at the UN, there were a number of, last week I mentioned some anti-Israel resolutions. This is just, it's stunning. This is a constant, it's a permanent agenda item at the UN, Israel. I can show you picture after picture of the destruction in Syria, in Yemen, in other Arab lands that never really makes the agenda. Now, they did do some things about Yemen at the UN this week, but this was a resolution that was introduced by the United States and outgoing UN Ambassador Nikki Haley to condemn Hamas. Now, the first thing they had to do was they had to vote on whether they would require a 2/3 majority to approve the resolution. And Nikki Haley asked, let's waive the 2/3 majority requirement so we can condemn this terrorist organization. Everybody considers them a terrorist organization, so they voted on it. And the vote to change this ended up being, I think you'll see the vote tally coming up here in just a second. It didn't get 2/3, they had to get a 2/3 vote to prove it, so there were 75 in favor. Plurality approved it, 26 abstentions, 72 against. So that led to some debate then about, do we condemn Hamas? Here's what the Iranian representative had to say.
Any solution to this crisis requires the termination of the occupation, restoration of all the inalienable rights of the Palestinians, including their right to return, to self-determination, and to establish their own independent and viable state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif at its capital. Despite all of the brutalities and recklessness committed by Israel, along with the unwavering support, plots, and plans of the U.S. in this regard, we are confident that all such rights will be realized and the force of logic will prevail over the logic of force.
Okay. You should listen to his whole talk. You can find it on the UN has a great multimedia, if you're inclined to listen to illogical people talk about the use of logic. And it's clear that, look, this is U.S. and Israel Zionist conspiracy to take over everything. So they voted on the Hamas resolution, and they had a chance, but it required a 2/3 vote. So the activities of Hamas and other militant groups, and it got a plurality. 87 countries voted at the UN to condemn Hamas.
L42 has failed to obtain 2/3 majority. Therefore, resolution A/72/L42 is not adopted.
And so this was, of course, the Tehran Times. U.S. fails to condemn Hamas, but a majority, a plurality of those voting did vote to condemn it. Now, they also brought up another one about comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East. The UN press release says this: such a peace, unfortunately, is not currently in sight, said Ireland's representative while introducing the text. This came from Ireland. Ireland has just put in place some BDS-type laws to prevent people from buying things from Israel or Judea and Samaria. Stressing the importance of reversing the current negative developments on the ground, she added, this is the Ireland representative, she added that a settlement of the conflict must meet Israeli and Palestinian security needs and Palestinians' aspirations for statehood and sovereignty, as well as resolve all final status issues. And the result, this is the result on the Hamas one. So here's what some of the language in the comprehensive, just, and lasting peace proposition said. Reiterates its call for the achievement without delay of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of the relevant United Nations resolutions, including the principle of land for peace, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Quartet Roadmap, and an end to the Israeli occupation that began in 1967, including of East Jerusalem, and reaffirms in this regard its unwavering support in accordance with international law for the two-state solution of Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within recognized borders based on the pre-1967 borders. Those borders are referred to in Israel in many quarters as the Auschwitz borders. They are not defensible. I could spend a whole session on that. They want to go back to these borders. It's just not feasible. So they voted, and the vote was 156 in favor, 6 against, 12 abstentions. I think the country's voting against. I'm not sure about Australia. I believe Australia did, Canada, United States, Israel, and then Micronesia usually votes with the United States, and then there's another small island country someplace. Danny Danon, the ambassador to the UN from Israel, he had a long statement in opposition to this, but this is a little quote that I pulled out of what he said.
This reminds me of Israel's former ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Abba Eben's infamous comment. He spent many years in this building, and I quote, "If Algeria were to submit a resolution that says the earth is flat and Israel flattened it, it would pass by a vote in the General Assembly, and the result will be 164 in favor and 13 against." That was more than almost 50 years ago. Nothing has changed in this chamber.
By the way, this is the exact quote from Abba Eban. He was I believe, the first ambassador to the UN. He was the one who was there on on November 29th, 1947, when the UN voted in favor of the partition plan. I played a clip of that, I think, last week. He's a very fascinating man. Look him up on YouTube. There's a lot of videos out there. His interview with Mike Wallace. Very articulate man. He was from South Africa, Jewish, studied at Cambridge, highly intelligent, 3 advanced degrees that very few people ever get. A very engaging person. He passed away, I believe, in 2002 at the age of 87. Married to his wife for almost 60 years. A real lion in the development of the nation of Israel and its growth on the world stage. Abba Eban, E-B-A-N. So here's the headline from this morning or the other day. Despite 87 votes, the UN General Assembly fails to condemn Hamas. Ambassador David Friedman had a tweet for Hanukkah, and this is what he said. More than 2,000 years ago, Jewish patriots, Maccabees, captured Jerusalem, purified the Holy Temple, and rededicated it as a house of Jewish worship. The UN can't vote away the facts. Jerusalem is the ancient and modern capital of Israel. Happy Hanukkah from this blessed city. That tweet prompted a response from the Irish foreign minister, Simon Coveney. And he said this: "You are working on a new peace initiative that we all hope will be fair, balanced, and successful. But comments like this will be seen as provocative and biased, not helpful in creating the necessary environment of compromise." Now, a lot of this came about. It was 1 year ago that President Trump announced, I think it was just a year ago this week, that he was going to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. That came almost exactly a year after the U.S. refused to vote with Israel for the first time at the Security Council and veto a Security Council resolution, sort of one of the outgoing things of the Obama administration in December of 2016. You can go look at my update from that time and find out what he said. So this is the state of Irish politics. And it was 1 year ago when Trump announced that he got a lot of pushback from people in the Muslim world, including Erdogan. Erdogan said this, and turn the sound down. Last night, the U.S. president announced his decision regarding Jerusalem.
Amerika
He has disregarded the 1980 UN
başkan
resolution.
ülke. Aslında Birleşmiş Milletler 1980 kararını filan adeta içe saymıştır.
Essentially, he goes on to say, we'll throw
Sayın Trump'ın
Jerusalem
neye
into a ring
yaranmak
of fire, the
istediğini
region into a
anlamak
ring of fire.
mümkün.
Trump's decision on Jerusalem
Çünkü
to throw the
Kudüs-
region into a ring of fire.
Değerli kardeşlerim,
Until today, Jerusalem was viewed as a place of worship for Muslims, Christians, and
Müslümanların-
partly for Jews.
Hristiyanların ve kısmi olarak da
Now, the website that this is on, this comes from Yeni Sefek, which is you can go yenisefek.com. I believe they have a lot of their more current stuff is in English also.
tabii ki
And
Müslümanların
you'll see this is a mouthpiece for Netanyahu.
ilk
Not
kıblemiz
Netanyahu, for Erdogan. And they put up everything that he says like it's the gospel, and this is what he said. And so then this is just a year ago, I put this up. This is the graphic that appeared on the Yeni Sefek website about how Islam viewed Israel and Jerusalem. Does this look like they want peace? Now, this was kind of interesting if you look at it from a perspective of Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 and 39. It was about a week later that Netanyahu, or not yet, sorry, please excuse me for confusing the two, for Erdogan to speak at an Islamic conference and say this. Essentially, he said, a new attack has been launched using Jerusalem to target the entire Middle East and all Muslims. What was the attack? Trump saying, I'm moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. We took the first steps regarding this matter on Wednesday, and we will follow through. If Jerusalem falls, we will not be able to protect Medina. If Medina falls, we will not be able to protect Mecca. If Mecca falls, we will also lose the Kaaba. Do not forget that Jerusalem means Istanbul, Islamabad, and Jakarta. Medina means Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad. And so what was Netanyahu doing there? Erdogan. I want Erdogan to go away. But what was he doing there? He was talking, this is what? A holy war. This is where the context that Ezekiel 38 and 39, and I think Psalm 83 fits into. These countries around the region are aligned against Israel, and Turkey wants to reassert itself as the head of the Islamic Sunni world. In fact, someone that I would recommend that you follow on Facebook, if you do that, is Avi Abelow, Abelow. I've played a couple of his videos before. He regularly interviews Caroline Glick, Melanie Phillips, and now he interviewed a former Israeli defense person this week who talked about one of the things that they talk about internally, but they don't really mention this much, is the push by Turkey into Jerusalem. They're buying places. They're sending, tourism is almost doubled from Turkey over the last couple of years. They call them jihad tours. That's their word, jihad tours to Jerusalem. So pay attention to that. Avi did an interview this past week. People are concerned in a lot of different areas. I have 2 points I want to make. This is an article that was in the Times of Israel. Europe is finished, leading lawyer says as he leaves the UK for Israel. And this is what this lawyer said. I believe his name is Mark Lewis. He's one of the leading litigators in London, in England. And he and his partner are leaving England to move to Israel because of anti-Semitism. He said this in the interview: "We're a wandering people. It's time to wander again. People just don't want to see it," Lewis said of his fellow British Jews. "We've accelerated our decision of moving to go to Israel because of anti-Semitism being so institutional and accepted in mainstream life." Blumenthal, that's his partner, charged. "So many people have these ideas about Jews being responsible for every disaster that that's ever happened in the world." And boy, is that ever growing. Back in August, they were interviewed on the BBC, and here's just a brief clip from that interview.
I think Jeremy Corbyn is a distraction to the position. Jeremy Corbyn moved the rock, and the anti-Semites crawled out from underneath the rock. They're not going back.
It was interesting. You got to look up that interview. It's on YouTube. Just type in Mark Lewis, Blumenthal, BBC. The interviewer was just very strongly defending Jeremy Corbyn through all of this. Oh, yeah, he went to a cemetery and laid a wreath on these people, but he didn't really know what was going on there. He went there with a bunch of terrorists. And Mark Lewis says, look, how many times do you have to defend him? How many breaks does he get for associating with bad people before you're going to realize he's really a bad person and he's an anti-Semite? This week they got to Israel. This is a picture up in the top there of them arriving at Ben Gurion Airport when they made Aliyah, and here's a brief interview.
It's finished. We're wandering people, and it's time to wander again. People just don't want us here.
We've accelerated our decision of moving to go to Israel because of anti-Semitism being so institutional and accepted in mainstream life.
And she's right. Melanie Phillips has an article along this line on her webpage today that just came out. Will black be the answer to U.S. Jews' diaspora blues? It's an interesting thing. She talks about the fact, and this is an interesting parallel between what's going on in the evangelical church and what's going on in Jewish circles. I'm struck by the parallels, the things that are going on in both places that are similar. So we have attacks on Trump and Netanyahu, and we have this growth in both Judaism and in Christianity of this concern about social justice. She says this. Please stop with the pop-ups. I've already subscribed. In a recent speaking tour in the U.S., I kept coming across Jews who were consumed by the anxiety that so many of their young people were turning against Israel. Is this not a concern that a lot of people express in the church? I want you to see the parallels because I think there's some wisdom as to what she said. I encountered such anxiety on previous trips, but this time it was worse than ever before. She was just in the U.S. last month. Their children, they said, were being hoodwinked by bigoted hostility to Israel, wildly ridiculous lies and libels that they were choosing to believe because these formed the default anti-Zionist narrative on campus. What was to be done to reverse this, the parents repeatedly asked. I told them something that many didn't want to hear, but which I believe to be an inconvenient truth. Young American Jews are turning against Israel principally because they are disconnecting from Judaism. And translate that over to what we see going on in the evangelical church and learn from wisdom. And the reason for this is their parents are generally disconnecting from Judaism, largely because of the impact of the progressive denominations to which some 3/4 of American Jews subscribe, and which are telling them that liberal universalist values are authentic Jewish values. What's happening? Leftism is the most powerful religion of the last 100 years, and it's overwhelming people's commitment to Judaism, people's commitment to Christianity. But they are not. They are in fact inimical to Judaism. The community's secular religion of Tikkun Olam, or supposedly Jewish social justice, is a fraud. I wish there are not many pastors that speak about this growing social justice movement in the church in these stark terms, and there should be, because it is a fraud. It's a distraction to the true gospel of Jesus Christ. As Jonathan Newman puts it in his excellent book, To Heal the World, American Jews have been led to believe that the purpose of the Jews in the world is to campaign for higher taxes, sexual permissiveness, reduced military spending, illegal immigration, opposition to fracking, the banishment of religion from the public square, and every other liberal cause under the sun, all in the name of God. It sounds, in respect, can I be blunt for a change? It sounds like Wheaton College. It sounds like a lot of other Christian schools, so-called Christian schools in America, that are losing the plot. And yet people send their kids to these schools unprepared, and what faith they had is crashed on the rocks of leftism that permeates all of these institutions. So 3/4, she says, of American Jews have contracted a kind of religious autoimmune disease, which has caused them to junk the stuff that will protect their spiritual health while eagerly embracing the stuff that will destroy it. They really, really didn't want to hear that, nor, I suspect, dear readers, do many of you. So you may like to look away now because there's worse. I asked a rabbi what could be done to pull American Jews back from the edge of the cultural precipice on which they are teetering. His answer was startling and brutal. Just give me Yavna, he said. This was a reference to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, as the Romans prepared to destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD, chose not to try to save the city and the temple, but instead asked the Roman general merely to give the Yanva yeshiva and its sages. The request was granted. Yavna duly became the spiritual center of the Jewish people and ensured its survival. The point was that Ben Zakkai realized the behavior of the Jews in Jerusalem, led by zealots who had destroyed their food supplies in the belief that God would save them from the Roman advance, was dooming the entire Jewish people to destruction. What the rabbi in America meant was that he had given up on the wider American Jewish community. No longer would he even attempt to persuade them that they were on the path of communal self-destruction. They would never listen or change. Within a fairly short time, given the accelerating rate of intermarriage and assimilation, that part of the community would have effectively disintegrated. But spiritually, ethically, Jewishly, it was already lost. In dramatic contrast, the much smaller Orthodox community was growing by leaps and bounds. So all efforts, he said, needed to go into supporting and financing that Orthodox world because that's where the Jewish diaspora future lay. This is a great article. So said the rabbi, the American Jewish community wasn't doomed at all. It would just be smaller and look very different. It would be a remnant. But like Yavna, the quality of that remnant would be all that would matter. I told you it was brutal, but value judgments aside, it's hard to fault its logic. So will black be the answer to America's diaspora blues? And the same question could be asked of the church. Will that be the answer? It's because, folks, we are living in a time of remnant time. Whether we want to admit it or not. When I hear stories, when I travel and speak and meet other Christians, and I hear of people driving 1-2 hours each way to go to find a church that is faithful to the Word of God, I know it is remnant time. Not just in America. I heard it in England when we were there, and people from all over the UK and some from Europe were there to say the exact same thing. We starve for fellowship. We can't find someone who teaches the truth. Paul told Timothy near the end of his life, 2 Timothy 3, that I read early on in this talk, all Scripture. Remember the Holy Scriptures, Timothy. You were taught them from your youth. They are what will feed you. They are what will protect you from the seducers and evil person who will grow worse and worse as we get closer to the end. And everything I look around and I see is exactly what Paul said. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable. All Scripture. Truth is truth. And we need to get back to that truth. I have one more thing I want to talk about. I'm trying to decide whether I should do it or not. Well, if you have to leave, leave. And you won't offend me. We talk a lot about Ezekiel 38 and 39 because we know that this is something clearly coming and we see the alignment coming to place. And one of the things in Ezekiel 38, 39, the question is asked by people looking on at what's going on in this invasion. Why are you coming? Are you come to take a spoil? Now, there's a couple pieces of news over the last couple weeks that I don't think anybody has really made the connection on. One is news from the Department of Interior of the United States. Now, I know you're going to say, what? What does that have to do with anything? This is upending world markets. It may have a very negative effect on world markets. It may be a very good thing in the long run, but in the short term, it's very disruptive. And here is what it is. In the Permian Basin, in the straddles West Texas and New Mexico, eastern New Mexico, they have released information this week about oil, recoverable oil using today's technology that's there. And these reserves contain an estimated mean of 6.3 billion barrels of oil, 281 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 20 billion barrels of natural gas liquids, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. The Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zink, said this: Christmas came a few weeks early this year. Now I know for a fact that American energy dominance is within our grasp as a nation. The find there, the reserves are sufficient to meet all of the U.S. power and energy needs for 7 years. That was in the article. I just found the 7-year thing to be kind of interesting. But Russia relies mostly on what? Oil and gas. Saudi Arabia relies on what? Oil and gas to some extent. This is upending geopolitics. I don't know what the impact will be. They're already talking about, the U.S. was also announced a week ago, for the first time since World War II, has become a net energy exporter. This is because of fracking and other ways to recover oil. We export more oil than we consume. Saudi Arabia and Russia are trying to figure out what to do with it. And I'm not sure what was going on with the whole high-fiving at the G20 between Putin and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I don't know. At the same time, Israel is coming online with its Leviathan field, building a pipeline to Europe. And at the Jerusalem Post Diplomatic Conference, Thanksgiving week here in the U.S., one of the people associated with that project had this to say.
I think this is my third year being here, and every year, when we first started, when are we going to get Leviathan going? When are we going to get Leviathan going? And I'm happy to report today that Leviathan is going strong. We're going to flow gas as we committed to back in 2016, and that gas is going to flow before the end of 2019. We've seen tremendous progress. We're almost 70% complete with the project. We're drilling our final wells, completing our final wells. We've laid the pipeline, and the jacket, which are the legs of the platform, will be leaving Corpus Christi next week for the transatlantic voyage, and those legs will be set in Israeli waters in mid to late January.
Wow, so this is a historic time to be talking to you. What day next week?
I don't want to say exactly what day. This is a huge structure, and what happens is they complete that and kind of skid it out onto a barge that makes a transatlantic voyage of about 6 weeks.
The new mayor of Haifa, I should say, and others are concerned about the environmental dangers posed by Leviathan. How do you respond to them, and how are you keeping Leviathan environmentally safe?
Sure. First, we understand that there are those concerns. I think it's important to note that natural gas that we've been providing from Tamar and soon from Leviathan has displaced all of our imported fuel oil, which is more polluting. I think Minister Steinitz spoke about it this morning. There is nothing that has been better for Israel's environment over the past decade than the introduction of natural gas, which has displaced that fuel oil and some coal. What we're going to do with Leviathan is going to complete the displacement of coal in the Israeli market. Today, 70% of our electricity is produced from natural gas. That's going to increase to 85%, with the rest being made, as Minister Steinitz said, by renewables. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. There are questions that have been raised about the Leviathan platform and what impact that will have on the environment. First of all, I think it's important to note the Leviathan platform uses best available technology. It has everything on there to minimize the emissions from the platform as much as possible. We have commitments to the Israeli government, to the regulators here, both in the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Environmental Protection. And we're going to have total, I'll give you an example, total benzene emissions of about 200 kilograms per year. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of about 5 gas stations. So that's not something that we don't know how to live with. The other thing I think that is important to note is those emissions are going to occur 10 kilometers offshore, and those emissions don't reach the shore. So the only thing that the people in the area opposite the Leviathan platform are going to, the only impact they're going to have when they look out 10 kilometers offshore, they're going to see a platform that today doesn't exist. But in exchange for that small kind of structure out in the horizon, what they're going to see is that the coal plants in Hadera are going to be shut down. They're going to be breathing cleaner air, healthier air, and we are working to ensure that they have as much transparency and information that they will know that they are living.
Well, it's a very interesting development in terms of energy. I'm going to put this off till next week. ISIS finds a niche in northern Iraq. Very interesting article by Jonathan Spire about what's going on. ISIS is regrowing. What the Sunnis that are left, it's very sectarian in Iraq. The Sunnis that are left are becoming extremists and sort of reconstituting ISIS. And there's a lot of theories right now about what's the U.S. doing there, what's our relationship with the Kurds, the Peshmerga, the Syrian Defense Forces. And it's all I can say is it's very complicated. We're there. The Kurdish area in Syria is the oil-rich, energy-rich area around Dar el-Zor. That's under control of the Kurds right now. Syria wants that back, for obvious reasons. But the other thing that's happening is, as I mentioned last week, the Iranians are importing Shia Muslims to replace the Sunni Muslim population that has been forced out of those areas. It's a look. This is a jihadi concept, taking over a place by immigration. This is what they do, and they get a twofer, in that the Sunnis go and do their jihad by immigration somewhere else, like Europe. And this is causing Europe, Europe is collapsing in my view. How this plays out in the end, I don't know exactly. There's a lot of different views. I'm open to a lot of different views on how this is all going to play out, because I think, I look at Daniel chapter 12, and it says in the end times there will be wise who will understand what's going on. To me, that implies that things are going to be happening in the end times that are not going to be quite like the little charts and graphs and books and everything that we've written before. And we have to be open to adjusting things. And I think a lot of people are, but I'm just telling you that's the way it's going. And I'll say one more thing. There is an attack that's taking place sort of on the president through his family. This week, a couple of articles, and it's going against Israel too. Max Boot, who used to be right for Foreign Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, Israel's betraying its own ideals. Today in the Washington Post by David Ignatius, their security guy, the cyber trap that was set for Khashoggi. Haaretz, big article today, this is front page of Haaretz this morning, Israel okayed spyware sale to Saudis. This is a backdoor attack on Trump and Netanyahu and their relationship with the Saudis. It's interesting that, and look, I don't trust the Saudis at all. And I've been critical. We just buried a guy this week who was in league with the Saudis on many, George Bush, the Bush family. But does the media ever bring that up? You know, and now we have an attorney general that's coming from the Bush 41 administration. I don't know. He's been a very successful lawyer since he left the Bush administration. He represents a lot of major companies. He's on the board of Time Warner, which owns CNN. Well, I just have to see how it plays out. I don't know exactly how he's going to be. I know a lot of people at Justice respect him. But so the report is Israel sold cyber analyzing software to Saudi Arabia. It was used to track Khashoggi and his friends, and that's how Khashoggi got killed. So what are they saying? It's the Jews did it again. Israel did it again. They're controlling everything. And then this today, not only the things going on in France, but this article on the front page of the New York Times this morning about Jared Kushner. And you're going to hear more about this. I heard a little bit about it earlier this week. And then today there's a huge article in the New York Times about Kushner and his relationship with Mohammed bin Salman. And the suggestion being made in some quarters that Kushner was passing secrets along to Mohammed bin Salman so he could make up his hit list of people to get rid of or to torture. And again, I'm just telling you, you need to watch the developments in this. This is a huge article, and it's being picked up all over the place. It's a front page, big, detailed article. You should look it up and read it. New York Times this morning. So a lot of things going on. As I said at the beginning, the world is in turmoil. The only answer for this world is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Belief in the finished, full, complete, for all time work of Jesus Christ on the cross to save you from your sins that you can access simply by believing that his work was sufficient. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to read things with the perspective of Scripture. Help us keep that in the forefront of our mind at all times. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.